What's going on, everybody? We are here talking Afterlife Apologetics. Welcome to another episode. For those of you who are new here, welcome. We like to talk about near-death and deathbed experiences and the relevancy they have to helping prove worldviews, either true or false. And so, in those who have returned for today's episode, you guys know that we've been spending our last few episodes discussing deathbed experiences and all the lines of evidence from Steve's great work, Deathbed, his dissertation. And so we've gone through some amazing lines of evidence that Steve has done a great job compiling. But there are a few things we want to do today. So I'm going to give you guys just a quick kind of itinerary for what today's episode is going to look like. So first and foremost, we're going to do a little recap. So I'm going to cover really briefly, I'm going to go over the previous lines of evidence that we've had in the past so that you guys can kind of get caught up to speed. And then from there, what I want to do is I want to talk about the Angel Studios upcoming project, and we'll spend a little time on that. Then from there, real-world application of near-death experiences and deathbed visions. It'll make sense once I get there. And then, of course, you have your lines of evidence number 7 and 8 that we're going to get into today. And we still have plenty more after that. So for those of you who are joining us, again, thank you for showing up. Welcome. If you have questions, as always, guys, we want to point this out, that if you do have questions for us, please post them in the comment section. I've gotten several questions on some different videos that we're absolutely going to take time to dedicate videos to in the future. So if you guys are really curious about what this looks like in terms of getting your questions answered, you just post them on the comment section below, and then Steve and I will dedicate episodes in the future to answering some of these questions. Some will be a brief, quick answer. And then some we're going to dedicate entire episodes to because they're that loaded. So as we go through these, Steve, help me out if I have a moment of silence here in terms of recapping. Help me stay on track with that, all right? So number one line of evidence was the ability to influence our time of death by solely mental means seems unlikely given a naturalistic, materialist, physical theory of the brain. So in a nutshell, line of evidence number one is that if we are solely just our bodies, if our brains are who we are, then why do we have the ability to express our will over when we die? If we are simply subjected to naturalism, then it wouldn't matter what we wanted. Our bodies would die when they die. So it seems very interesting, we'll say, that we are able to influence our time of death by will. Number two, under naturalism, how could we know we are dying without sufficient physical predictors of death? This is, again, in a nutshell, this is like a supernatural knowledge of when you're about to die. We've had, in that section, we talk about people who seem to have a supernatural knowledge of their impending death, even though they have no reason to think that they're going to die. It seems that they know and accurately predict within a day or two of when exactly they're going to die, even when doctors have no real reason to think that they're going to die. Line of evidence number three, naturalism indicates that people should not be able to have accurate premonitions of the deaths of others. We spent a great deal of time on this one. I think we spent a whole episode, Steve, talking about this one. And within this one, we're essentially saying that people are having premonitions and accurate premonitions of near family members or friends dying, and then going to confirm them, corroborate them in real time with doctors or hospitals or whatever family members, and they do in fact find out that the premonition they had of someone dying is in fact true. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Steve, but we did have somebody come and comment on that video who said that that is in fact what happened to them. They had a premonition of their father and uncle passing away, and in fact that happened just a few days later. And so these accurate premonitions of other people dying just seems completely inexplainable under the naturalistic framework of the world. All right.
In fact, beyond just premonitions, these people are actually seeing these people after they've died, which gives us an indication of the afterlife. They're having a vision of this person saying goodbye. You might just skip to the table of contents. I've just got the questions listed right there.
Steve's hooking me up, man. Why don't you give us number 4 then, Steve?
Number 4, if DBEs, deathbed experiences, are either normal dreams or hallucinations, then why are the dying often surprised to see people on the other side who are not known to have died?
Give it to
so
us
you
in a
could see them
nutshell.
having some kind of like, if they were expecting to see a deceased relative, that's fine. But if they didn't even know the person had died, expectations can hardly explain that. Then, since brain deteriorating diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia and meningitis render brains more and more dysfunctional, then how, under naturalism, would patients with these diseases often experience sudden lucidity, indicating consciousness, optimal brain function, memories, and rationality before dying? So let's see, we're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You want
Yeah.
to keep going
The
there?
the lifelong mentally challenged sometimes become lucid, clear communicators and thinkers at the time of death. And for those of you who missed it, we basically sum this up to: you go to a junkyard and you find a car, you then pop the hood and you see that the car has no engine. When you turn the key, the car turns over and turns on, right? And you can even go places for a short period of time. This is essentially the illustration that I used in that episode to show how terminal lucidity just defies all explanations and expectations. In that, when we see someone who has a deteriorating brain, the actual brain matter itself is now being compromised, you would not expect it from a mechanical standpoint to be able to perform its normal functionality. As a matter of fact, that's kind of how we know these type of disabilities or handicaps or whatever you want to call them exist, is we can actually see these malformations in the brain. And so when these people have deteriorating diseases like Steve mentioned with Alzheimer's and things like that, you would expect the mechanical function of the brain to be completely an inhibitor to their capability to actually have lucid conversations and consciousness essentially performing normal. And so when we see that happen on deathbeds, again, it's referred to as terminal lucidity, in that it happens so often they have a name for it. And so within this framework, we just talk about, for me personally, I mentioned how much of this one is a very convincing line of evidence for me. Matter of fact, I would rank this the highest of all the ones that are listed. So the terminal lucidity, in addition, the mentally challenged seem to also demonstrate an extremely high level of clarity. And we gave some really kind of chilling, but they're chilling stories that have happy endings, right? Of people who are just spend a whole life consumed by mental ailments and unable to speak, and they're doing all kinds of behavior that just shows they're just not all there. But towards the end, they demonstrate behaviors that are just completely counter opposite to what they've demonstrated their entire life. And so again, these line up with lines of evidence in terms of terminal lucidity and the functionality of the brain. It's almost like supernaturally they're given one last little window of opportunity to say their goodbyes, to kind of tie a nice bow on it, and then depart this plane of existence. So that catches you guys up. All right. That seems like a lot, right? But we actually spent a whole episode discussing these. So if you guys want to go back, watch those. It's the last 3 episodes, I believe. So 18, 19, 20, and this is 21. So if you guys really want to hear us talk these in depth, go check those ones out. So on to our next thing. So now that we've recapped that, many of you who are fans of near-death experiences and just these phenomena and all that they entail, Angel Studios is releasing a movie on it, I believe at the end of the month, right, Steve? It's like October 28th or something like that.
I've got it down for the 27th here in Ackworth. I don't know where it starts elsewhere.
Are you going to go see that in theaters or?
Yeah, I'll go see it the first night and the first time I can, so that I can start letting people know what I think. I really didn't know anything about it till Dr. Sabohm, who's actually interviewed in the film for his expertise. He was one of the founders of the society that studies near-death experiences back in the 70s. But he emailed me. We keep in touch, and he was really consulted a lot on the film. I respect his research. I respect his theology. So I suspect that there's going to be that it's going to be a good film.
Yeah. So I'm also going to go see it that day when it comes out, and what we'll do is once it comes out, guys, we're probably going to dedicate at least a whole episode, if not more, to the content of the film, to discussing the film. I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, I know that both Steve and I, the one little hesitancy we have in terms of some of like John Burke's works is not that I necessarily disagree with it on an overall perspective, but from a argumentative and apologetic perspective or research perspective, as Steve likes to say, an objective perspective, there can be a tendency to cherry pick Christian experiences and then kind of construct around those as opposed to observing the whole body of near-death experiences. So, but again, I mean, that could be totally wrong, right? So I'm just kind of painting, that's kind of my hesitation going into the film, is like, how much cherry picking do we see happen in the film? Because, that's just constantly a battle I deal with in the comment section on YouTube, of people coming in and saying, XYZ experiences tell us this about reality. And that's kind of what I feel like, Steve, you and I have to spend a lot of time doing, is saying, like, you have to survey the entirety of the landscape. You have to look at all the experiences collectively. You can't just start cherry picking, oh, this one's real, that one's not real. And if you do start throwing experiences out, which we have done, you have to have a objective criterion by which you throw those experiences out, such as, okay, well, we can't take experiences where we believe that psychoactive drugs are involved in the experience. It may be a real experience or it may not, but we can't really know because of the contamination of this variable, right? And so in my mind, it's like, that's when you can cherry pick, when you have an objective criteria that can be applied across the board, as opposed to saying, like, going into these experiences and saying, oh, well, all these experiences are true and God is love and yada, yada, yada. So it's like, okay, well, if you're using these experiences to get to that level, there are more of these experiences that would contradict that position. So those are some of my hesitations going into the film. But from my understanding, they are bringing a lot of the research experts out who have done an amazing job. You can actually get their books and read through their entire studies, which is exactly what Steve and I have done. Steve, much more than me. I'm trying to catch up to him, but he's got like a couple decades of a head start on me, so it's going to take me some time. But nonetheless, these are great people to listen to. I'm excited for the film, and I'm excited for how that will generate more of a conversation around these experiences and what they mean. And that's actually a great transition point to go into my next talking point for this episode, which is the real world application of these.
Well, let me add one other thing about the film. So basically what Charlie's saying, I think, is that it's fine to use individual experiences. And John Burke does this. I think he does a pretty good job of saying, okay, here's some experiences that I've seen. Now let's look at the research and see if that backs it up when you've got multiple cases.
Yeah.
I hope that's what the film's going to do. I know that Dr. Sabom is great with that. So hopefully they followed his lead in that. But basically in Proverbs, it says the fool believes everything he hears. And sometimes we don't apply that to people who are from our own worldview. So if this is more from a Christian worldview, I really don't know anything about Angel Studios. Sounds kind of spiritual to me, but we need to go in with our minds wide open and say, oh, this and that are really good evidentially. Oh, but this I'm not sure how much, and keep our minds functioning and listening to it, and listen to the Holy Spirit talk into your life as well.
Yeah, and to that point, we're trying to go into it with establishing it as a good line of evidence and not coming into it with with the Christian presuppositions and saying, oh, well, because Christianity is true, these are true, right? We want to come at it from the opposite angle of, okay, these are true experiences, and therefore what worldview properly explains them. Again, great transitionary piece. So what is the real world application? So I'm sure many of our listeners are aware of Israel and Hamas and all this stuff, this turmoil that's kicking up in the Middle East. And I don't really want to talk about it from a political standpoint. I want to talk about it from a real world applicational standpoint. I think that war, turmoil, these type of periods always generate a lot of confusion and concern on an existential level for human beings of, why would God allow this? What good can come of this? What is happening in the world? And I think that you can see clear lines of just, what's the old saying, only a fool believes in coincidence. And so it's like you look at some of these events that transpire in these major world events like this, and there just seems like there's this evil trajectory of events that are transpiring, of it's just like, worst case scenario keeps unfolding. And so how this relates back to Afterlife Apologetics is that within Afterlife Apologetics, Steve and I are adamant about arguing for the validity of these positions and why they can be believed in, because beliefs shape thoughts, thoughts shape actions, and actions shape reality. And when human beings have bad belief systems, it creates bad realities. Okay, those two are correlated together. And so within Afterlife Apologetics, there's a deep desire to, of course, understand if these are true or not. Why are they true? What are the good reasons to believe them? What are some of the hesitations we have? That's all well and good, but the ultimate goal is how can we use these in a way to shape our beliefs to be good and true so that the reality we create accordingly is good and true. And so sometimes it can feel kind of meaningless to talk about this kind of stuff when people are dying and cities are being bombed and et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, it's very important for us as humans to remember that people carry out actions because of beliefs that they have. And so really, if we want to start by changing hearts and minds, we start with the beliefs that people carry, why they carry them, understanding that, and then trying to help undo bad beliefs and replace them with good beliefs, right? And that would create good outcomes. So to me, the connective nature between the real world and what we do is we really want to use these as a line of evidence that may convince some people on this earth that there is good reasons to believe that Christ was who he said he was, and that Christianity is true, and therefore those belief systems should be the ones that they hold, and therefore the reality they create reflects that. And that ultimately is a reality that's in the best interest of everyone. I truly believe that. And so to me, that's why we go over these things. That's how this kind of interconnects with the world. And that's our ultimate heart in this, is that we want to use these lines of evidence to really help establish for people good reasons to carry out a particular worldview, because we think that worldview is in the best interest of everyone, even the people who disagree with it. Because I'm going to be honest with you, under Islamic law and Christian rule, Christians are told to be tolerant of those who disagree with him. That is not necessarily the case in Islam. But Steve, anything to add to that?
Not really, just that I think a war like this kind of does the same thing that COVID did for us. It reminds us that we're not going to live forever.
Right.
There's death all around us. It's always been around us, but all of a sudden we're more aware and can't get away from the thought. And eternity changes everything. It changes the way we forgive, the way we love, the way we touch the lives around us. Our concern becomes other focused rather than self focused, because we're thinking, I want to take as many people to heaven with me as I can. And I think that's what this is all about. This isn't some just intellectual exercise, but it's saying what's life all about? What's really important? I think loving God, loving people, making sure we get our theology as close to truth as possible. Those are some of the most important things we can be involved with, and it changes our lives radically. It was interesting. I noticed a few weeks ago they had the Nobel Prize winner for literature announced, and he was Norwegian, I believe, a Norwegian writer. And my wife's reading. She keeps me involved with the broader spectrum of everything going on. New York Times, what's going on in the world. I'm always diving really in depth into some one topic. She keeps me in touch with the world, but she says, "Hey, this guy had a near-death experience." I said, "Really?" So I looked it up, and sure enough, about a year ago in the New Yorker, I believe it was, there was an article, an interview with him, and he said, "You know, it was November 2022 interview in the New Yorker, and he had this experience when he was a child, and he said that was the most important experience of his childhood. He had an accident and it had a near-death experience. He says to this day, he says that was fundamental to him. It has been a very formative experience to me as a person. I think it created me as a kind of artist. So rather than just going into something else, he became a great thinker, a great writer, a great artist, and it impacts people. These things about eternity. Heaven changes everything. So this is super relevant stuff. We got a film coming out. We've got a Nobel Prize winner talking about it. this is relevant.
What was his book on, Steve? Do you know?
Oh, he writes all kinds of novels and creative type stuff in his life, and but
Do you
thoughty enough to warrant a Nobel Prize in literature.
That's interesting. Okay, so do you know if he is like what his beliefs about the metaphysical are, or
He
or his
became a
believer?
believer in Jesus later in life,
Okay.
and I can't remember if he went the Catholic direction or Protestant
It's
direction,
kind of
but
irrelevant.
later in life.
Yeah. I think we would both agree that it, as long as they're adhering to orthodoxy, it doesn't really. Anyway, we don't have to get onto that one today. That seemed like a rabbit hole. Okay, well, very very cool, Steve. Well, thanks for sharing that. That is in fact super awesome, and I think that just reflects how common they are. People just don't even realize it, and we just have a tendency to kind of write them off as. I think that we have a tendency to write them off as if they were just these like personal experiences that, oh, this happened to me one time. And we're just like, oh yeah, good for you. But the whole point I think we try to get to is like, no, these are very well studied. There's a lot of really great research out there. And we want to really push forward good thinking in regards to like, what do we do with that research and how should that impact us? And we should in fact view near-death experiences in a different light than say someone who went into the mountains and then had a personal transformative experience. Not to say that experience in and of itself is false or true. Not saying anything like that. I'm just saying there's a lot more evidence to take a near-death experience as a higher, more reliable experience because of the objective evidence that has emerged from the studies of it. Would you agree, Steve, or no?
I agree, and so when people like Dr. Allison, who's taught his whole life at Princeton, or much of his academic life has been there, when he says that an experience when he was a teenager, a supernatural experience that transformed his life, that made him study philosophy and religion,
Mm,
that's the reason he's teaching there at Princeton and teaching Bible and theology. Well, I take it seriously because now I've seen the evidence,
mm,
and so it really makes those more meaningful, and then we start talking to people around us, and we find out these experiences are all around us,
mm,
and we need to start helping people work through the meaning of these experiences to their
mm,
lives, because 'cause they're powerful, but we're still so, uh, as I say, naturalism has made cowards of all of us, even in the church, and people just won't say it. They don't know how to process it. But I think we need to start talking more about these things. And when we find them in the lives around us, our circles of trust, they become even more powerful as an evidence that we're on the right track. There's a spirituality out there, there's a heaven out there, and we need to live in light of that.
all right. That's a great cutoff point. Excellent. Excellent job, Steve. Let's go ahead and transition. I know we're kind of in the back half now, so let's go ahead and transition into the lines of evidence. So again, for those who have stayed with us this far, deathbed experiences, we're talking about the lines of evidence as evidence for the afterlife. Steve and I have been discussing it in great detail. The book that we are pulling from is Steve's book here, Deathbed Experiences as Evidence for the Afterlife. So if you want to go to Amazon, you can pick up your copy. It's one of Steve's more academic works, and he has said that if you want to pick it up and you want to read, one chapter and then skip ahead to chapter 10, he doesn't care. Like, his heart is that this information be available to you guys. So if you want to pick it up and read fully, because obviously we do not have the time to go through all the details Steve outlines here, but there's a lot of really excellent points that I think if you really want to see how strong of a point can be made for us, you should absolutely get the book. But our attempt is to make it a more digestible and accessible format by doing these podcasts. So, line of evidence number 7: if deathbed experiences can be fully attributed to physical characteristics of the dying brain, then how do we explain deathbed phenomena being shared at the bedside by the living who have a healthy brain? Steve.
We got two hypotheses we're setting up. We're trying to be scientific about this and see the data that we have. Does it fit better into a dying brain hypothesis, which is naturalistic, or an afterlife hypothesis, who says that we can know things that are not just known through the physical brain? And so we already talked about this, so we won't go in depth into it. We talked about that in the book on near-death experiences. but it's especially prominent in several of the types of deathbed experiences. I'll give you one example. And again, this would not be predicted by naturalism. It is something that's consistent with a Christian worldview or worldviews that talk about your soul being able to leave its body. This is reported not by a YouTube video that I randomly picked up. This is Linda H. Moore. She wrote a PhD dissertation on this at Texas A&M University. She was getting her dissertation for Doctor of Education. It's interesting that we have educators, psychologists, psychiatrists, all kinds of
MDs,
people,
medicals,
philosophers, commenting
cardiologists.
on these things.
Yeah.
So this comes from her dissertation of 571 nursing faculty across the United States. She reports this: staff shared the story. This is staff like in a nursing home. Staff shared the story of a patient who was dying, who had talked about some of her relatives who had died. When she died, the staff, there were many staff there, observed in the telemetry, the camera, by which they monitored her bed. They saw a lot of people around the bed with her. However, there was no one with her other than the hospital nurse and the RT. When the woman died, the camera showed them all leaving the bedside. The phenomenon was observed by multiple staff, and in parentheses, and it really freaked them out. So here's something they actually got on tape. There were more than one, but it's the bedside, and it's not the patient saying, I experienced this and this and this. Oh, I'm seeing deceased relatives. But it is the staff whose brains are not dying saying they saw this. They saw all these additional people in there. So that is called a shared death experience. Raymond Moody wrote a book, I believe it was Glimpses of Eternity, where he collected a lot of these. It's a common experience. I mentioned my cousin Bucky, who shared an experience where his father had died, and at the same time, he woke up having a near-death experience. So you can't very well say that this was caused by a dying brain if the brain was not dying. These are experienced by people who are perfectly healthy with healthy brains. Again, I'm suggesting this would not be predicted by naturalism, a materialistic view of the brain. It does support a view that says the soul can separate, that there are actually deceased people out there that are alive and communicating with people. And by the way, hey, Elijah in the Bible, you say, well, this is really getting weird. This is weird stuff. I need to talk about something that's in the Bible. But Elijah, he was talking to somebody. He was with another who reported him being taken to heaven in a chariot, right?
Mm.
Okay, so that would be a shared, somebody else outside shared his experience.
Mm.
That's all I have to say about that. We could go into several different multiple cases, but I think we can move on from that.
I would say that maybe I'll try to see if I can't somehow track down the video that she cites in her PhD. Does she
Get in touch with her. I think she's still teaching.
does she have a like a? I mean, I would assume she had some people who asked her if she could produce the video, seeing as she cites it in the dissertation.
I'm not sure. Trace it down. That's what us researchers do. We'll spend days doggedly trying to track something like that down. Stabaum certainly did it, when he was tracing down different experiences. So yeah, get in the research mode and just sniff that baby out.
All right, let's move on. So, line of evidence number 8. If DBEs, deathbed experiences, are caused by purely physical aspects of dying, then what accounts for post-death visions reported by people who are not experiencing the same physical causes?
So what we're getting into here are after-death communications. Now, we saw that one atheist had said, oh, near-death experiences are BS because the people aren't really dead yet. So, they're having visions, but until you've actually died, how would you ever know if there's an afterlife? The thing is that people in their experiences are seeing deceased people on the other side who've often been deceased for a long time. Now, this is an additional experience to near-death experiences. One of the deathbed experiences I cover is people seeing people who have been long dead, and they're not having a near-death experience. They're not dying themselves. They're just randomly at some point, this person who died maybe years earlier appears to them. Okay. And so this is called an after-death communication. Carl Jung had an experience like this. He was the influential Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst who founded analytic psychology, well-respected intellectual from intellectual history. He said this in his account. He said, 6 weeks after his death, my father appeared to me in a dream. It was an unforgettable experience, and it forced me for the first time to think about life after death. Okay, so you have this super realistic experience of your father. It forced him to think about life after death because he's a psychologist. He's thinking of what causes our changes in thinking all the time and why people think the way they do. And he can't explain this thing away. It was so real, it forced him to think about it. My favorite rock band, Kansas, wrote a song, Lamplight Symphony, and it's about a person who saw an apparition of his deceased wife. She began to fade and her image disappeared, so he was left alone to face the night. Never in his life he'd ever been so held in awe as he faced the apparition of his wife. If you want to see some philosophy in song, listen to Kansas. But let me give you one from an atheist. Now, this is interesting, and you ought to go at some point and read Michael Shermer's article. It's online, free. It's called Infrequencies, is how he titled it. It was in Scientific American, October 2014. So Michael Shermer, who had the longtime skeptic column for Scientific American, he was used to debunking things like this, okay? Anything to do with the supernatural, he was debunking it. He was giving a skeptical point of view. He's written many books. He's an atheist, outspoken atheist. He had his own experience, which shook him, at least for a time, okay? So he said this, some people said, you shouldn't have even shared this experience because this just calls into question everything you believe, you know? But I applaud him for his willingness to share it. But he said, maybe I should just read part of it. He said, in his book Heavens on Earth, he tells about it again. He said, in brief, my fiance at the time, Jennifer Graff, now my wife, moved to Southern California from Cologne, Germany, bringing with her 1978 Philips 070 transistor radio that had belonged to her late grandfather Walter, a surrogate father figure, and she was raised by a single mom. She had fond memories of listening to music with him through the radio. This was in Germany, right? Tuned to different stations, right? After putting in new batteries, leaving the power switch on the on position, we gave up, tossed it in the desk drawer in our bedroom where it lay dormant for months. During a quiet moment after our vows at a small wedding ceremony, this is when they were getting married at their home, Jennifer was feeling sad being so far from her family and friends and wishing she had some connection to loved ones, most notably her father and her grandfather, with whom to share this special occasion. We left my family to find a quiet moment alone elsewhere in the house when we heard music emanating from the bedroom, which turned out to be a love song playing on that radio in the desk drawer. It was a spine-tingling experience. It could have been tuned to any station, or more likely between stations producing nothing but static, but it was perfectly tuned to a station playing music suited to the occasion. And it could have come on at any point in the months after or before the wedding ceremony. But it happened at the very moment Jennifer most needed that connection. The radio played similar music for the rest of the evening, went quiet the next day. It's been silent ever since, despite my repeated attempts to revive it. He added a few more details from the Scientific American article. That one was from his book. He said, at that moment, Jennifer shot me a look. This is when she heard the radio playing. Jennifer shot me a look I haven't seen since the supernatural thriller The Exorcist. That can't be what I think it is, can it? She said. She opened the desk drawer, pulled out her grandfather's transistor radio, out of which a romantic love song wafted. We sat in stunned silence for minutes. My grandfather is here with us, she said tearfully. I'm not alone. Her conclusion from that was her grandfather was communicating with her.
Mhm.
How do you explain the precise timing of that? They had tried to get it fixed in every way possible. It just didn't work. It'd been sitting there for months, and then boom, love songs come on. Now, I was geeky enough to sit down and try to figure out, okay, okay, this is not something that tunes itself to the station that's coming in the clearest, right? This is an old transistor, and I figured out the number of possibilities there were for where you know, for it to be tuned perfectly into a station like that. The time, the extraordinary tuning of the radio. So I said it could have been set on any station between FM 88 to 108. Okay, you got to be an old person to understand this. But you used to turn a knob and it would go along these numbers till you got to something that was tuned in. There are 20 whole number possibilities, but since stations can be tuned in tenths between each number, they need to be multiplied, giving us 200 possible settings. 200 possible settings. It was in Germany before. It's not been set to a station here in the United States and there locally. What are the odds? Well, one odd in 200, right? But then what about the odds that would happen at that exact time? I came out with 4,320 possible hours that it could have been if it was 6 months before, 6 months after. My chances are one chance in 100 or 864,000 that it would have happened at that exact time, been tuned into the exact station, and came on right when it needed. So, how does Shermer deal with that? Well, he said that his skeptical followers came in and said maybe there was a sunspot that just happened. And then he's like, well, yeah, but why was the sunspot at the exact time that that was supposed to happen? You know, every naturalistic idea they gave him just did not fit with the situation. So, what did Shermer do? Well, he said it really shook him in his worldview for a bit, and he just kind of left it at that. But then by the time he wrote his book, he said, well, there are billions of people in the world, okay? And they're having billions of experiences. Some of them are just going to happen because you've got billions of people with billions of experiences. It happened to me. What do I make of this? He said, well, I don't need to go refer to God or something like that. I just need to sit and wonder and experience that I don't, that I don't understand.
Yeah.
Now, my thought is, one scientist said, I think it was Wheeler, said, take, you know, take the most interesting thing in your field and go explore it. The thing that doesn't seem to fit with anything else, go grab that because science is all about observations and trying to make sense of them.
Mm.
Why doesn't Shermer, being an author for Scientific American, do the scientific thing by saying, okay, let's look at the odds and then let's say, hey, maybe these type things are happening to other people. And we could see if the odds actually are in the favor of it, happening. But instead, he just leaves it. To me, this is a prime example of naturalism of the gaps, by which no matter what you see, you say, oh, well, in the future, at some point, we'll be able to explain this naturalistically. We just don't have it now, which
Mm.
means that naturalism is unfalsifiable because there's nothing you could bring up that would possibly, if you're going to relegate it to future evidence
Mm-hmm. Future
and
science.
future science,
Mm.
and it doesn't allow you to explore the afterlife hypothesis. So I said, let's try to explore the afterlife hypothesis and see if this makes sense. Are there other people, a large number of people experiencing things like this, which we're calling after-death communications? Interestingly, some of this study started at Harvard University in their psychiatry department. Dr. Kaplan, who was over the department at the time, says this grief study was one of the most important studies to ever come out of our out of our lab here. And what they did is began surveying people who were grieving. And it led to some changes, there's some conclusions that were different from past psychiatry. Psychiatrists had thought, number one, you needed to get over your grief, after a few weeks, move on with your life. If you're obsessing on this thing, you've got psychological problems. He said, no, some people experience grief for long periods of time, and that's okay. You love the people. Now, the sting of it, the horror of it all, yes, that can pass over time, but still people grieve even after years and years. That was one result of the study. Number two, they found something as they were studying people that was not expected. And that was a lot of these people. Now, you can imagine you're talking to a Harvard psychiatrist who's talking to you about your experiences with grief. You can imagine how tentative they're going to be. But they started sharing with them, I had a conversation with my deceased husband the other day, and I still consult him on things. And they were saying, this is really weird. And then they thought, we need to go back and start finding how common this is. And they found that it was a quite common experience. And they really didn't know what to make of this, but what they determined was, number one, this thing is not a sign that you're having psychotic problems, but it's actually helpful to the people who are experiencing it.
Hmm.
So let's not put down these experiences. Let's not just say, oh, you're hallucinating and this and this. Take it seriously. Listen to the person you're counseling, because this is extremely real to them. That study was followed up years later by there was a book written on it called Continuing Bonds, where they went back and studied. They had academics from various schools studying these experiences, and they found out, oh my goodness, these things are actually quite common. They're transformative, they're vivid. You've got sensory modalities, all these different modalities you hear, you see, you feel, and they were very, very common, what people were sharing. So I've actually got two chapters on this. The second chapter, I start getting into specifics, but I think I've got an incidence here. I mean, the survey that one person did, Jenny Straight-Horn, she did a PhD in counseling, which was a systematic review of research on after-death communication. She brought together all the research up to 2010, 49 research studies, 16 books and studies, brought them together. And the survey cites her involved responses from 50,000 different people. And basically 30 to 35%, get this, okay, think 30 to 30, that's like 1 out of 3 people in the general population are likely to have an ADC during their life. This is not a Shermer 1 out of billions, then he just happened to be the lucky recipient. This is happening to like 1 out of 3 people, and a larger percentage of those who are actually experiencing grief. So this is a very powerful 80 to 85% of people within the first year of bereavement are likely to have at least one ADC. Now, my first wife passed away in her 30s. I've never had an ADC, so I'm not in that group. But others have, and they're really, really powerful. And I think there are several lines of evidence within that to say that, number one, they're not psychotic, they're not delusional. They've done enough study to find that out. It's what they see. It's not just that they dreamed it, but they experienced it in modalities like touch, smell, sight. So it's something empirical that they experienced. It's not just a feely thing. They did not meditate or take hallucinogens or visit mediums to try to conjure up the experience. Those would have been thrown out of the studies, okay? They often spoke of the experience as real, something that they could never, ever deny. And it impacted their lives because it helped them feel better about where the person was on the other side. It's been studied by top researchers, and people don't have a reason for lying to these researchers. Why would they do that? So I think this is a very powerful, and you say, okay, that's you're getting into all this weird stuff again. But wait a minute. The Transfiguration. Jesus talks to Elijah and Elijah, two dead people. That's an after-death communication. They communicated with Jesus after their death. We already saw this in the Bible. I think this is consistent with the afterlife hypothesis that Moses and Elijah were really alive talking to Jesus. The disciples saw it, the three closest disciples, but it's evidence for the afterlife, right? And I think it's consistent with the Bible.
So,
Where have these studies been, and why have I never heard of this before? This is pretty impressive.
so Steve, I think that the number one thing I would push back on, and I'm curious to hear how you would kind of deal with this, would be, well, what's to say that these people are severely swamped in grief, and because of that, because of the emotional distress, it causes them to begin to have visions or perceptions of things that are not really there as a means by which to comfort them. So what would you say to that?
Well, I'd say number one, it's not if this was just some kind of expectation or something you conjured up there yourself, it would tend to be consistent with your worldview, and yet this is a global phenomenon. So it goes across all these different cultures who have different expectations of what should be happening in the afterlife. Many of these cultures are saying, in fact, like something like a third of people in the United States believe in reincarnation. So if these have been reincarnated as an animal or a different person, what are they doing speaking to you afterwards? So it's coming against many, many people's expectations of what should happen, and sometimes they're frightened or confused by it at first.
Hmm.
It's not something that they're hoping, and then, wow, it happens. Most of them were shocked when it happened. And then some of the things that happen, sometimes people will be told of something like, there's a life insurance policy that you haven't found yet, and you'll find it up in this closet about halfway down this stack of papers, and they'll give some specific information that they couldn't have known otherwise. So for those people, there's actual verification of it or corroboration that's not just there by seeing the person. But
Do you
again, I would go back to the thing of realer than real and say, I think that's important here, because if these are psychologically healthy people like me and you, I hope we're psychologically
I was
healthy.
like,
Sometimes I
the
wonder about
jury's
you,
still
but
out
I
on
don't
that,
know.
maybe.
Okay. But let's say that they're psychologically healthy people. It was so real to them that they concluded they really were meeting with their deceased relative.
Sure.
I have to assume that I would probably be saying the same thing if I had the experience. So why should I wait for the experience to have it if it's so prevalent and they're saying that they've all seen it and are reporting back? They're eyewitnesses.
But from a
And it was
naturalistic,
something that was empirical.
but from a natural perspective, couldn't you make the argument that it's a defense mechanism of some kind where the brain is recognizing? I mean, I'm like, as I'm trying to flesh it out, I'm like, oh, this sounds like a long shot, but whatever. I'm doing it for the spirit of pushing back.
No,
But
go ahead. That's
couldn't
the way we do.
couldn't you say that it's an emotional distress defense mechanism or something like that in the brain that recognizes the maybe low chemical levels are low, maybe hormones or something are off, and so it begins to regulate that by providing um, recollection of maybe memories that would be consoling?
I think those areas should be pursued.
Hmm.
Let naturalists or Christians who are exploring naturalism pursue that area. And I think we need to explore all hypotheses and
It's
see.
it's like I'm
Yes,
thinking,
those things, because it's not like they're sitting there at a really awful moment. Some are, but in the case of Shermer, let's think of that as a case. It, yes, they were psychologically primed for something like that because she was missing the two most important people in her life,
yeah,
her mom and this
yeah,
grandfather.
yeah.
Okay, but it wasn't just a visionary experience she had, but that radio came on,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Michael, the atheist, heard it. He
Mm-hmm.
couldn't deny it. So that's something on a different level that you can't really say, oh, well, I mean, had she had some kind of an experience with her grandfather privately, in her case, with her longing to see him, I could see psychologists jumping on that and rightfully and saying, you know, I think you conjured that thing up, and I'm glad it was meaningful to you. But you throw the radio into it, and it just doesn't. That theory just doesn't account for all the evidence. And also the people who like found an insurance policy, or then you compare it with the other lines of evidence, and you see this is kind of similar to uh, uh, an apparition
Yeah.
that people were saying that we read them, and for them the timing of it was significant because they would see this person on the other side at the same time they had died and they didn't even know they were sick. So I think when I bring all this together as a cumulative case, it makes me see, oh, these are kind of similar to crisis apparitions, and we saw strong evidence there because of the timing.
Sure, sure. I wanted to ask, or you were mentioning that with these after death communications, people are experiencing either a sound or a smell or is it a combination? Is it one in particular, like they're in a room and they smell the perfume that their wife used to wear, something like that, right? Like, is it, does my question make sense there?
Yeah, it's often a combination.
Okay.
They will see the person, they will my I have a relative who's who experienced his mother after she died, not immediately afterwards, but after a period of time. And he said, and I kept questioning on it. I said, just because I trust this guy. He works for a not for profit and has done tons of good in his life. Just a very respected person, a writer, very intelligent, talented person. And I said, just how real was it? And he said, it was real. I mean, I woke up in a cold sweat, after this thing happened. And he said, I know it was her. How did he know? Well, he saw her, he talked to her, he recognized her voice and her expressions. So that was hearing and putting together everything. Like I would know Sherry, my wife, anywhere I saw her. If I just saw her, if I just heard her voice, all these things come together. And for him, it was multiple things that came together that said, I know it was my mom that came back to see me,
Hmm.
and she needed to tell me some things that were important.
Yeah, I like how you note the transformation it has on people's lives. I think that there's just a massive gap in the theories I've seen produced by naturalism in terms of trying to explain consciousness and free will, or um, the will of a human being, in that there is something to be said for the veracity of the experience and how transformational it is for these people. I mean, if they walk away from the experience being like, that was 100% this, it was 100% this person talking to me. Again, I go back to, oftentimes we use the, can't you tell the difference between a dream and waking up from a dream and then reality? And it's the veracity between these two experiences that tells you that. You could apply the same kind of thinking here of, with after death communications leaving such a serious impact on people, if it was just simply a production of their own internal consciousness, I'm sure there would be some level, and I don't know for sure, this is just kind of a theory, but I'm sure there would be to some level a sense of disbelief in the experience, and therefore it wouldn't have the transformational effect that's reported so commonly within the study that you're citing here.
I'm no psychologist, but I would assume that experience would be something like a hallucination. And
Mm-hmm.
people have a hallucination, like they're under anesthesia or whatever, they have a hallucination. But when they come out of it, they know they had a hallucination.
Mm-hmm.
They know, okay, this is reality, that was not reality. But in these experiences, they're saying, no, this was real. This was just as real as me talking to you now.
I guess another question.
And they're not psychologically primed, and that it usually just kind of comes out of nowhere
Yeah.
when they might not even be thinking about that relative at all.
Yeah, yeah. That was the other thing I was going to kind of make a correlation to, was I was thinking about that in terms of some people will grieve and then kind of move on, right? I don't know if I would necessarily get over it, but they kind of accept it and then move on.
Mhm.
Whereas if it was a result of an emotional distress, or let's say someone never really gets over it and they spend 5 years just in a continuous grieving cycle, wouldn't it make sense that if it was produced out of naturalistic means, that therefore the conditions would remain the same, and that therefore these apparitions or these after death communication episodes would continue to be produced over and over and over and over again in an ideal sense to repair, as it were, the physiological conditions of the body?
Excellent point. Excellent point. And in the Harvard study, again, they determined that when they had a vision like this, that it was not some kind of psychological problem. It was not unhealthy. It
Mm,
was actually healthy for them. So these were not people who were dealing with grief in such a way that they couldn't continue on with any kind of a
yeah,
normal life.
yeah. So it wasn't like, you know, a psychological fight or flight response by the body responding to just like severe internal damage of some kind. It was like they're from all the things that we could tell, they were healthy, functioning human beings with healthy brains as far as we could tell. And then it's like, oh, here's this experience that pops up, and they're convinced of the veracity of the experience, that it was in fact the deceased loved one coming back to uniquely comfort them. It seems that is that kind of the common theme, Steve? Is that
I
it's
think
a
so.
comforting that's a kind of that's the desired outcome, is comfort.
Well, some are kinda scared when it first happens,
Yeah, yeah,
so
sure.
they're not like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" You know?
Yeah.
I mean, because some people, like one teenager, I think it was a parent who had died, and, they weren't on really good terms,
Mm.
and so it was kind of a disturbing thing but I think there was some soul work that needed to be done. Now, naturalistic psychologists might say, okay, well, even though that wasn't front and center, there were these issues that need to be dealt with, and that conjured up an image or whatever. So you could take it that direction. I just think that at this point, to me, the data that we have is more consistent with an afterlife hypothesis that this is really, for some reason, a deceased person um, is making an appearance,
Very good. Very good.
and it's all documented here. Lots of great studies, a couple of PhD dissertations I've talked about, a couple of studies by top academics in various fields. So, very interesting thing. And then there are some popular books that have been written as well. I'm looking for it right now, but one last hug or something before I go, something like that. There are a couple of popular books that have just or Hello from Heaven by the Guggenheims is one that just brings together a lot of experiences. These are just people that have written into them, so it's not like you've got a cardiologist confirming all this stuff. A lot of people have written in, but a ton of experiences that they talk about in that book.
All right. Well,
So, we're going to have to close because I've got
yeah.
another interview coming up. But
He's just,
this is
ladies
good
and
stuff.
gentlemen, Steve is just so popular these days. He just doesn't make time for me anymore, you know? Look at him. I caught
I'm
him red handed,
really I'm
speechless.
really, really glad that we're taking the time to go in depth because these little interviews where I just kind of do a little Q&A for an hour about the book, those are good. I like doing them, but I'm really glad that for the people who learn the best by watching videos and remember best or don't have time to sit down and read, but you can listen to it in your car. This really gives us the time to talk through these things because there's so much data that I think needs to be assimilated by the person who's sincerely seeking truth, and this gives an opportunity to get at that.
Yeah, yeah, and it also gives us a chance, Steve, to kind of like chop it up on particular points that we may want to camp on and be like exploring the different angles of. I know we both really enjoy the opportunity to do that. So no, you're totally right. It's a great platform for that, and we're gonna keep going, ladies and gentlemen. We have more lines of evidence to go over. So what you guys can expect is next week, God willing, we will definitely jump on here, get into the next section. I don't know if I believe there's 12 total, right, Steve? 12 total lines.
11 total.
11
There's
total. Okay.
12 for the near death experiences, 11 in this book.
So we might actually be able to wrap things up it just depends on, how long-winded we are about it. But yeah, we might be able to wrap this up next week. And but yeah, and sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys notice that, a week goes by and an episode doesn't drop, it's just sometimes life gets in the way for Steve and I. We both have families, we both have obligations, and so this is something we love to do, and we try to take the chance to get it done. But sometimes we may miss a week, but don't worry, we're going to get back out there, get into the next episode as soon as we have the opportunity to do so, and keep producing more for you guys. I would be surprised if anyone is fully up to date with all these episodes. So if you haven't, and you missed one, take that chance to go back and listen to a previous episode. But if you are fully up to date, comment below, because then I will just put my foot in my mouth, because that is impressive. We have talked a lot to this point. It's crazy to think how much more we have to discuss, but it's also really exciting because it's a fun topic, and we both enjoy kind of exploring the topic and the implications, more importantly, of the topic. So what's going to happen is we will see you guys next week. We'll be shifting to Wednesdays being our release day. It just ends up being a little bit better for Steve and I's schedule. So we'll shift to Wednesdays being when we release our new episodes. In the interim, God bless. I hope you guys go see the movie when it comes out. We'll promote it over the next couple of weeks, because I do think Angel Studio is going to do a good job. And we know a lot of people on the film who have done really great research and written some great books on it. And so we're really excited about that. And but God bless. We'll see you guys in the next one.